Let us offer our consecration to the Lord. Lord, we offer up to you this day, and we ask that you answer our prayers in ways that lead us to be deeply rooted in all you call us to be, that lead us to live the faith as you call us to be, and seek to love you with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength. And we ask this through Christ our Lord. Well, it is Thursday of the 6th week of Ordinary Time, and we're continuing looking at James. And James is talking today about not showing any partiality. And of course, this is something that happens all the time, but he talks about if a man with gold rings on his fingers and in fine clothes comes into your assembly, and a poor man in shabby clothes also comes in, and you pay attention to the one wearing the fine clothes and say, "Sit here, please," while you say to the poor one, "Stand there and sit at my feet. Who do you think you are?" The "who do you think you are" isn't in there. "Have you not made distinctions among yourselves and become judges with evil designs?" So he's talking about that division, and that division can be based on everything. But, that really comes down to the whole concept that you often hear is that rich people are good and poor people are bad. Or I hear the opposite. Poor people are good and rich people are bad. Whereas the reality is people are people, and there are good and bad in both groups. But I think a great story that really illustrates this, and I have no idea if this is true, but it was a story that I thought I'd share. When you hear the full story, you'll probably say, "How old is he?" Anyway, most of you know I'm 63. But anyway, the story went that there was this ice cream there was a restaurant that also had an ice cream parlor. They had a little bar that they didn't serve alcohol, but they often served desserts. It'll all make sense when I tell you the whole story. And there was this really, this man who wasn't really finely dressed. He was in maybe an old raincoat with a, what do they call him, fedora. And he wasn't a very necessarily charismatic person, just sitting there. And he asked for an ice cream sundae. And as the story goes, and it may in fact be an urban legend, but it wouldn't surprise me if this was true. As the story goes, the waitress starts making the hot fudge sundae or whatever it is he asked for, and he says, "No, that's not how you do it." And she says, "You can't tell me this is how you do it." "No, that's not how you do it." And he got off his seat and went behind the bar and started to make the ice cream sundae, and says, "Sir, you can't do this. You're not allowed to do this. You must stop. You must stop." He says, "No, I'm going to do it." And you must stop. And finally, he took off his hat and says, "I want to let you know my name is Howard Johnson." And of course, it was Howard Johnson's. And if you don't know, Howard Johnson's, which was based in Quincy, Massachusetts, was obviously created by someone named Howard Johnson, and was a nationwide, I think international chain of restaurants and eventually hotels that were in the area. And they were known for, among other things, their good food and their ice cream. And so that was Howard Johnson's, and this man was apparently Howard Johnson. Well, he purposely did not come in dressed all fancy and everything, looking like he was the greatest thing since sliced bread, because he wanted to really make sure, number one, that principle that we see in James was portrayed, was that regardless who walks into that particular restaurant, that he was treated, or she would be treated respectfully, and that the work was done correctly. So, and that's a famous principle that obviously Jesus teaches in Matthew 25. "When I was hungry, you gave me food. When I was thirsty, you gave me drink." So the reality is how you treat others, regardless of who they are, is how you treat Christ. Now, the mistake we make is if we assume that that rich people are by default either good or bad. And I've been in both camps with people. I've been in both camps. I have people who tend to believe that all rich people are by default good. And I've been in places where people tend to believe that rich people are by default bad. And I've been in both places. So, and I remember, I might as well tell you the story. I was in South America. And I was in South America with a Mexican seminarian who came from a very, very rich background. He told me, he said, we have a swimming pool in my backyard. Now, you might be listening to this in the area and say, or somewhere in the United States and say, well, a lot of people have swimming pools in their backyard. Not at the time in Mexico. Okay, so different ballgame. So, and Mexico really didn't have as much of a middle class as the United States does. And so what you had is this great division between the rich and the poor. So those people who were serving the poor would by default consider anyone who was rich to be bad. And they would think that by default. And this is when I was in Ecuador, and he was with me and he said, that really angers me when people talk like that. He says, I have a swimming pool in my backyard. They'd be really upset if they found that. But just because someone is rich doesn't mean they're bad. And he was a great person. He was a seminarian. I hope he went on to become a priest because he'd be a great priest. But that's one of the things that happened. That's that whole default. Now, at the same time, I've been in places where I can tell you this, or actually we'll tell you this on the other side of the break. You're listening to St. Anthony Overnight from St. Anthony Parish in Allston, Massachusetts, right here on WEZE 590 AM. And you can also hear us at CatholicAudiomedia.com. That's CatholicAudiomedia.com. We'll be right back right after this.
I want to call your attention to Catholic TV, which offers great faith-filled, family-friendly programming 24 hours a day. You can find your cable channel at www.getcatholictv.com, and you can watch online on the free apps or check out the YouTube channel. Daily Mass, Rosaries, the Divine Mercy Chaplet, and the Our Lady of Perpetual Help Novena are all available online and on demand. Check out CatholicTV.com.
And don't forget our own website, CatholicAudiomedia.com. That's CatholicAudiomedia.com. You can check out our website, check out the archives of the show, check out our Substack newsletter. You can also check out different things over there. You can give us input for homilies over there. There's a little instruction how to do that. There's a tab over there for that. And you can send us feedback. Please consider that. Please consider what you think of the program. And you can also find our address there. But if you want to know, it's 43 Holton, Holton Street in Allston, Massachusetts. 43 Holton Street in Allston, Massachusetts. You can connect to the parish, but you can do that. I can give you that information too. STAnthonyAlston.org. Alston is ALLSTON. STAnthonyAlston.org. But you can do all that through as well. CatholicAudiomedia.com. So anyway, you have this story. So I was telling you about people who by default would look upon the rich as being bad. And obviously people are people. There were some very good people who are rich. There were some very good people who are poor. There's very bad people who are rich, and there are very bad people who are poor. But one of the things that happened when I was in the Navy, we pulled into the Philippines, which was a very poor area. And as I told you, speaking about the whole rich and poor thing, as I may have told you before, when I was in the Philippines, Ferdinand Marcos was the dictator there. And he, while I was there, had a birthday party for martial law. And when you have a birthday party for martial law, you can be defined as really out there. But he did. And he was also, again, the rich and poor thing, he was also one of those dictators that is common in the tropical areas who has a walk-in refrigerator that he turns into a disco. Now, why would you want a walk-in refrigerator as a disco? Obviously, this would be a huge refrigerator, and what would be the reason for having a huge refrigerator, which would be very expensive in a very poor country? Why would you have that? Because if you have a walk-in refrigerator and you make it a disco, people who buy furs and wear furs can wear them at your disco. That's the reason. Yes, you say that. I knew a man who he was a priest, and he was from the Philippines, and he served in a very rich parish, and he literally could only last a month because they sent him there in the summer, and people were wearing their furs in the summer there because they wanted to show off their furs. And he says, I come from an area where I just can't live with that. whole concept. And so he asked to be moved, and he was. So you have that whole idea that some people will say the very rich are by default good. Other people say the very rich are by default bad. The opposite can happen. So when I was in the Philippines, there was this river that I can't say the name of the river, literally, because it is against FCC rules. So, but that's the river. That was the name we called the river. And I don't care if you were an admiral. I don't care if you were the Secretary of the Navy. If you wanted to know the name of that river, if I asked you the name of that river and you were the Secretary of the Navy, you would use this word as the name of the river. That's what they did. So, and that's what it was called. So there were some very, very, very poor people, and they told you, anything you are wearing, if you're wearing a watch, you're wearing anything, because they're so poor, they will steal it from you. They will, they'll get it off your wrist. So be careful there. Well, of course, because they're very poor, and here you might be walking along with a watch, which to them was very expensive, and they could sell it on the street and help to get some food or whatever. So, and they wouldn't ask you for money, for there were others that would, but they would just take what you have. And, obviously, there's that whole picture there. And at the bottom line, you've got James saying you treat both groups of people as you would a Christian group. So if you're dealing with these rich people who are wearing furs to the disco that's in the walk-in refrigerator, you might want to say, really, if you want to live your Catholic faith, that's not someplace you belong, especially if the person hosting the party, regardless of his political status, which at the time was president, also happens to have a birthday party for martial law, as crazy as that might be. You might want to say, Catholic doesn't belong there. And I know I'm talking to other people who aren't Catholic. Christian doesn't belong there. No, you don't belong going to a disco where they're wearing in a walk-in refrigerator in a tropical country. No, that's ridiculous. At the same time, you might want to say that, hey, look, if you are stealing from people, granted, you may say you're entitled to this, the whole bit, but that's also, number one, stealing, but it's also reflecting a lack of trust in the Lord. And maybe if you said, look, here's our situation, can you help us? That would be a different situation. Now, granted, when I was there, I was not in the church, and I came back to the church at that time. But I remember living in that area, and you had the very rich and the very poor. And that's where I learned, outside of the Bible, I learned the whole concept that the very rich are by default good and the very poor are by default bad, or the reverse, the very poor are by default good and the very rich are by default bad. Just doesn't make any sense. People are people, and we're called to lead all people to know where true goodness is, and that is in Jesus Christ. Have yourself a blessed day, and we will talk to you tomorrow. En Cristo vivimos.